Thank you both for your introductions. I'm sorry to be speaking to be the only English person here and to force the proceedings to continue only in English. But my Portuguese is not up to it. I have one really powerful impression of the last 48 hours in Portugal, which is that I've had more and more stimulating conversations about architecture, architectural teaching, architectural drawing, than I have in 2 years in England. It's really been wonderfully stimulating, and my head is still spinning with the various exchanges that I've had, all the things that I have to follow up about. So it's really, for me, completely a treat to know that at least, however boring I am, I at least have a receptive audience here tonight. I'm going to try and combine two things in what I talk about today. One is just to try and explain what drawing matter is, what we try to do, how we try to do it, where we do it, to some extent why we do it, but also along that sort of, through that trajectory, also try and explain to everybody here the enormous impact that having Alvaro's, or having a portion of Alvaro's archive within the collection, the enormous impact that that has had on the way we do things and what I think of as our capacity to generate knowledge. So 2014, when this lorry arrived from Porto with all of these drawings and models, was a kind of pivotal year for us in terms of how we reach students, how we approach exhibitions, and so on. So the two topics will dance with each other. Dance is perhaps too fanciful. They will interact with each other as I talk. I will go. I'm just trying to find which is the button I press at this moment.
I'm so sorry because we were supposed to put your PowerPoint.
And it was there.
No, it's here.
Okay.
Now you
Right, can we go? Can we? Okay, fantastic.
PowerPoint if you.
Okay, fantastic. I think the most important thing to say is that what we do at Drawing Matter is really the product of many accidents, and the abiding idea is that because we're relatively small in terms of the size of relatively small in relation to institutional collections, entirely private, that is, we receive no public funding, have no outside trustees and so on. The question that we're always asking ourselves is, what can we do in that context with all of those things that might be understood as disadvantages? What can we do to actually what can we do that an institution fails to do, in a sense, by dint of being an institution? And I perhaps wouldn't say this in England or Canada, but my strongest motivation was in a way watching the Soane Museum or the RIBA or the V&A or the Canadian Centre be defeated, allowing the very things that they existed to preserve, which were their collections, to actually defeat their own purpose. And I wanted to try and find a new model for how to look at that material and what material one should be looking at. Those are the two things, and they're all done on the premise that these drawings will be with me for the next 10 or 15 years. Inevitably, because of what they are, they will end up in an institution and become themselves then part of this machine that I'm fighting. And so in a way, I always think of myself as giving the drawings a last outing before they become institutionalized. Just really briefly this slide recurs, so it's really just a kind of placeholder which describes a certain moment. What I will, there we go. I'll just describe briefly where. This is a farmyard in Somerset, actually an active farmyard. The cowshed in the far distance there is full, as we speak, of cows. And I was brought up there, and about 8 or 9 years ago decided that the collection and what I wanted to do with it had become too unwieldy in London, and that there was an interesting question about that was raised by moving it to Somerset and placing it into this landscape, which consists partly of reused agricultural buildings that were built by my father, and partly by somewhat fortuitous architectural interventions that I had or am commissioning over the years. You'll see here in the left-hand slide, you'll see the oak obelisk that Peter Smithson designed. In fact, not for this site and not in oak. But when the project in Siena was cancelled, he persuaded me that it would be, it was something that might turn the space of the farmyard into a kind of semi-urban proposition. On the other side, some of you, I'm sure, will recognize Mr. Caesar's yellow concrete columns from the courtyard of the Royal Academy. He very graciously said to me once, after I'd moved them, that they look better here than they looked in the Royal Academy courtyard. I'm not entirely sure it's true, but they do a wonderful job for me of raising a question for visitors when they come about whether they're really arriving in an old farmyard, or whether this isn't part of essentially this isn't an urban space. And a kind of footnote to that is that this is a part of England that is changing incredibly quickly. And I always maintain that it's really a suburb of West London that is maintained at enormous expense by people like me to look like the countryside. That's the kind of particular suburban myth that we foster. I've often wondered whether the cows in the cowshed don't actually come from a theatrical agency when they know that I've left London. Just to raise again the question of, wrong way, I'll get this right. Just to raise again the question of what all these drawings are doing there and how they interact with the site, I thought I would show you this as a amusement. I acquired from Super Studio a very, very substantial part of their archives over a period of 5 or 6 years. And the very last thing that I got, because they were almost as reluctant to part with it as Mr. Caesar was to part with his sketchbooks, was the small plant chest in which they kept all the unused collage material that they had assembled over the years in Florence. So you had this wonderful image, this wonderful sense of these hipsters sitting around in Florence in 1968, simply ripping pages out of magazines that they fancied and putting them in the drawer for people or the drawer for cars or whatever. And that was their idea of architectural practice. Before they gave me, let me take the box, they insisted on doing one last collage, which is, as you've probably worked out, of the continuous monument arriving in the valley at Chatwell. And this is the building that you're seeing here is the archive building that where we keep the drawings. The site gets a couple of thousand, perhaps 3,000 visitors a year in normal times. They normally come in groups, student groups, with their tutors, so a studio leader and 15 or 20 students. This creates some problems for me because I invented a rule which I quite often break, but it's that only 15 people should be allowed to gather around a single drawing. That's the maximum number who can discuss it and exchange ideas about it. The students tend to come in much larger numbers than that. So we have had actually to adapt this space in a 1960s concrete barn for the students to occupy themselves with active drawing or projects on the site until they have their turn to go into the archive itself. This is the space of the archive. I keep telling you about these rules that I break. One of the rules is that the collection will never get larger than what can be contained in this space. We built it, Hugh Strange, the architect, and I, out of cross-laminated timber. And that was, in a sense, it's quite a good illustration of the proposition is that the mass of the timber walls stabilizes the temperature and the timber absorbs the moisture. So the simple rhetoric, it's a cellulose building to house a huge quantity of cellulose objects. We're still trying to find out. What drawings don't like is getting hot and cold, like all of us. They like stability. The idea here was that it was a kind of proposition to test conventional museum practice. All of these institutions that I work with on a regular basis spend huge fortunes building very high-tech storage, which costs then a fortune for them to run. And worst of all, from my point of view, the atmosphere in which you look at the drawings is entirely artificial, and the light equally. So, but I'm also very well aware that that was a risk that no institution could afford to take. So I'm not, what I'm hoping is that in 10 years' time there will be a body of professional papers that demonstrate that this is an acceptable environment for drawings to live in, and we might change museum practice very slightly. This is a kind of footnote, but is a joke against myself. I say 3,000 people come to the site, and I'm passionate about the principle of looking at drawings directly, not virtually. We started this website, to which now has something like 3 million visitors a year. So I'm the person who was promoting the original, and I've created this monster that which people are perfectly happy to consult virtually. The key here is it's also an incredibly greedy machine. Okay, unless we upload 3 or 4 new texts every week, we see immediately the interest of our readers trailing away. So in a way, I'm very proud of the website. In another way, I curse it every day. The simple principle here is a powerful image and a text of whatever length that describes it, that describes the image or images accurately and imaginatively. And the writing prize that was referred to earlier was an expedient for generating more copy for the site. And we've just started a peer-reviewed journal with some of the same intention, because I was suddenly conscious that for early and mid-career academics, actually to have to be able to publish with a vehicle that gave them some kind of status and reputation was important. Just in terms of what to look at, the point of showing you this image, which I'm sure you'll recognize, is a plaster model made in Le Corbusier's studio for the south facade of the church at Ronchon in 1951-52. Partly I'm showing you this for 2 reasons. One is to make the general point that that I conceive drawing very, very, very broadly. It's a lot of the time it is a pencil and paper, but it's actually any process, tool, or mechanism that reveals something about the architect's process of design. Why I particularly respond to this model is because there are contemporary descriptions of Le Corbusier pushing his paintbrush through the wet plaster and getting excited about the deep reveals in the plaster. And it's actually only after the date of this model that the walls of that facade of Ronchon become 3 or 4 meters thick. So there's a real suggestion here that the process of model making actually inflected the process of design. And that, for me, is that's a justification for... I'm generally resistant to models because they seem to me too often to represent fixed moments in a process where there's no real window into the working process, if you like. Somewhat similar, a mise collage for the glass skyscraper. I use it to illustrate something that I perhaps quixotically believe, which is that if an architect is, or a designer is possessed by a powerful idea, he or she is almost compelled to test to the limits the medium and the conventions that are available to them, or to him or her, to represent it. So there's a sense, perhaps a bit naive on my part, but there's a sense that a great building, or the idea for a great building, can actually produce a great drawing rather than the other way around. In Mrs. case here, as some of you probably know, he actually employed the set design team who had worked on Nosferatu to model the Williamine houses in the below, and dedicated this sheet to his master Peter Behrens, from whom he'd parted company with some tension over the Muller Commission 10 years before. So it's also a kind of peace offering. Always a little unclear when you look at the German whether he's sort of saying, look where I got to without you, or I couldn't have got here without you. It's a funny thing. And the other point about speculative schemes, which I love, is one should never neglect the historical background. This was a moment where there was no work in Berlin. The French were invading the Ruhr. Hyperinflation was just beginning in the Weimar Republic, and Mies had time on his hands, I think. Two drawings here. The one on the right, both by Charles Percier, who was Napoleon's principal architect. The one on the right is in a museum in France. It was in the French Salon in 1799 and represented Percier's bid to remodel the Louvre to accommodate the antiquities that Napoleon was, and the pictures that Napoleon was bringing back from, was stealing really from Italy. From Italy, so he brought back the kind of cream of the Vatican collection and the cream of the material from Villa Albani, from the Albani collection, of which there are many things here. I'm actually showing it to you because it barely interests me as a drawing. It's too finished and tells one really almost nothing about the thought process that generated it. I will show you this one. I mean, you can see this one then at a larger scale, where Percier has, and it's of course reversed because it had then to be, it was used as the rough for the finished drawing. Percier changed the material that he was going to include in this imaginary museum, but you can see the perspective lines, you can see the corrected mistakes. So this is a drawing that I'm thrilled to own. Until 10 years ago, it would have been dismissed by the collecting market. It's the finished drawing that everybody imagined they wanted. And it's a relentless problem. I don't have it, but let's say MoMA has it, that they don't know whether they're collecting these things as works of art or as documents. And my contention is, whether they're works of art or not, one always has to examine them as documents first. And this little episode I've shown you is my kind of proof of it. I'm still on the subject of what to look at. The core of the collection are the sketchbooks. We keep them in a cabinet close to the door of the archive in the appalling eventuality that there's a fire. The local firemen are instructed to get the cabinet out before they take anything else. At the same time, and to go back to this sort of conflict between museology and archiving, at the same time, my colleagues in museums say to me, you know, we don't really like, of course we understand the importance of sketchbooks, but you can only show one page at a time, and they represent incipient conservation problems that we would much sooner not address. I'm fine with that. It leaves the field much more open to me, and as I say, these are the key documents. If I had nothing else by an architect, I would want a sketchbook, I think. This is an illustration of one of our responses to the problem, the display problem of sketchbooks. We were asked to do an exhibition in Berlin on the subject of sketchbooks, which I co-curated with the V&A. And the solution we found to how to articulate the sketchbooks, or one solution we found, was wonderfully simple. I simply flew to Porto one Sunday morning with 7 of Mr. Caesar's sketchbooks. We put a camera above his head and an ashtray, as you can see, and for the original session was planned for 2 hours. I think he's forgotten, but we were still talking at 6 o'clock in the evening. I think in terms of a way to examine material, it was incredibly powerful. I had the architect there, able to explain to me what the process of thought was, and above all, these significant moments when you turn over the page or whatever. What I then did is persuaded the unfortunate museum in Berlin to agree to open the vitrine in which the Caesar sketchbooks were displayed every second day and turn the pages. And we then cut the film so that the monitor beside the vitrine was always showing him talking about the drawing on display. I mean, it was a very elaborate and complicated solution but in a sense, I was entertained the other day to see that a museum in London has tried the same expedient for something else. We actually, partly because I was coming here and watched the movies again, we slightly re-edited them, and they're actually at the top of the homepage of the Drawing Matters site this week. So if you go on the site, you can treat yourself to these 7 movies. This is a slightly different tack. This is something we do at the early stages of an exhibition. The story here was that Martin Dabecke from the ETH in Zurich came with his curatorial team and the idea of curating an exhibition about the cornice. What we did for 2 days was simply pull drawings out of their normal sequence and pin them up on the wall, and you can see James Wine's a Schinkel drawing, a huge Frank Lloyd Wright drawing, Gordon Matter Clark, Bibiena. It was in some ways a response to the problem that curators and researchers have in conventional archival situations where they sort of have to know what they want to look at before they arrive. The possibility of these kind of speculative conjunctions is incredibly remote. After 2 years' work, the chaos in the archive was then transformed to this very ordered presentation, which I saw actually for the first time a couple of weeks ago in Zurich. This is actually a drawing by James Gowan. The reason I'm going to show it to you actually begins with Alvaro's article written in the 1980s, I think, in which you say that you would love to build in the Sahara. That somehow in the process of excavating for the foundations, you would find some clue to give context to the building you're making. I had just been reading that when the whole Gowan archive arrived with us in Somerset, and here Gowan was the partner of James Stirling, and who built these really key public housing projects in England, some still in partnership with Stirling, and then in this particular case in Greenwich in the late 60s on his own. And he's here, as you see, reimagining his building in the Sahara. What it provoked was a absolutely spontaneous exhibition proposal that we put together in about 3 weeks and exhibited in the AA in London, where we took 2 important Gowan social housing projects and 2 of Alvaro Caesar's housing projects, made during the same period, but in very, very different political climate, and explored the extent to which they were confronting the same problems, adopting the same solutions. And I will show you some more images of that. A tiny digression in the meantime, which is that I've always been fascinated by these images of Hans Hollein. We have some very early Hans Hollein sketches. On the left, he's drawing a Mesoamerican site in New Mexico. And on the right, in the same sketchbook, on the same trip, he's extrapolating from that to invent his own structure, if you like, his own structure in the desert. And I was responding to that partly because of this super studio image, which is right at the end of the continuous monument sequence. If you can imagine, the continuous monument has been around the world. over a period of 4 or 5 years, it comes back in 1972 to Florence to find that its job has been done, that the city, it has of its own, by its own agency, superannuated the city. It's called Florence as a Field of Wheat. And it has nothing at that point to do except to join itself a little sadly to the ends of the Ponte Vecchio in Florence and become, as Natalini pointed out, actually become part of the Vasari corridor. It had a particular resonance for me because of these two images that Ivo encouraged Mario Ramos and Fernando Barroso to give to the collection, and which some of you may recognize. They're in this wonderful exhibition in the Garagem Sul in Lisbon at the moment, which is called Architects at Play. But they, for me, represent the kind of culmination of this sequence of drawings where, in a sense, the city is either the blank canvas for construction, or the desert is either the blank canvas for construction, or the sand has, in this case, invaded the avenue you all know. To go back then to Gowan, this is Gowan. This is how we developed the parallel exhibition project. Very, very different solutions to creating accommodation on more or less the same scale in a quite tight urban site. So on the right is Borsa, on the left is Trafalgar Road in Greenwich. But at the same time, although in plan very different, both schemes adopt this sort of stacked maisonette format. They're 6 years apart as architecture projects. And then we went on through the archive exploring moments of overlap and similarity. On the left is Gowan, sort of imagining what will have happened to his project in a sort of indefinite future. On the right is one of my favorite drawings in the collection, which makes this, for me, very convincing and powerful point about the importance of the staircases in the Borsa project. Here again, Gowan is fantasizing about the future in which the building might be covered in a glass dome. Here on the right, Caesar is endlessly looking at configurations of the staircases. And when you look at the way the scheme develops over all those years, you sort of realize that the one point of continuity is always the staircases to the first floor, which sort of, to me, define the scheme. Here they are both looking at the way their projects present to the street. This is my favorite pairing. This is a later Gowan project for East Hanningfield, where he's trying to prove, whether to himself or to a public, that even in a world of general prefabrication, where all the craftsmanship happens off-site, there's still a role for the architect in combining these elements. On the right is Alvaro's drawing for one of the houses at Villa Viscosa, where, in a sense, he's working with the same constraint. As I understand it, there was in the mid-70s only one concrete block available in Portugal. It was difficult and expensive to cut. So every dimension of the building, and that's what this drawing is testing, every dimension of the building is driven by the dimensions of the block. So in a certain way, I feel they're looking at the same problem. That's one way in which having all the material for a single project gives one an incredibly powerful tool in terms of exhibitions or research. It allows these comparisons, and it was something that I simply wouldn't have been able to do before. The key to the Caesar Archive is that for the projects we chose, we have everything from the sketchbooks, through the sketches, through the technical drawings, through the presentation material, and the models as well. So one can actually look at the whole process of development. This is an exhibition that I'm sure you all saw, which was another opportunity of that kind, where Cosmiro and Nuno Grande took as a curatorial idea Caesar's process as a designer, and then examined, I think, about 30 key projects within the Lifetime's work. And again, and this is the point, it gives one an opportunity to make comparisons within each project on the kind of analytic thinking that goes on to explore the different drawing types that emerge from that. These two I like particularly, since they are in a sense so uncharacteristic of much. So this is, I think, type A of the Malagueira house, and this is a wonderful diagrammatic analysis of, if you like, the rules on which the designs were developed, which becomes, in a sense, then also the platform from which individual house owners can develop variations. Finally, there was a beautiful small model of the unbuilt half dome at Malagueira, which we were discussing with Mr. Caesar this afternoon, which offers this flavor of a little insight into the the unbuilt elements of the scheme, which are so much discussed. I was then, here you see the finished thing. I hope in what I've been saying, I have left some impression of how rich a tool a comprehensive archive, however focused, a comprehensive archival body of work provides to a researcher. It's really the opposite of I mean, so much of the time I see architectural drawings reduced to a very, very small number of so-called iconic images that recur again and again and again, and which actually offer very little insight. They end up sort of being slightly half-baked references for students in projects. The key to all of this is juxtaposition, is looking at this material side by side. I was going to end with the slide with which I began, and then on my way to it I found this one, which is of 8 students from the GTA at the end of a very long day in the archive doing yoga out of sheer exhaustion, but it sort of it felt like the right moment to end. I mean, I hope I've given some impression of what we try to do in Somerset. It's, I should say, completely a work in process, and because I have no fixed objectives in terms of what I want the outputs to be, I feel that in itself is an opportunity that most of what we do is in response to any of you in the room coming to me with an idea about how to look at drawings, and in a sense that's what keeps the machine rolling. Anyway, thank you very much.